Welcome, everyone. Before we jump in today, I really just want to offer a sincere blessing for your day. May God's grace and guidance be over your life and your entire week ahead.
Absolutely. That is a great way to start.
Because, honestly, you are going to need a bit of that divine guidance today. We are diving into an ancient text that bans people from the community based on, their crushed testicles, and it outlaws taking bathroom breaks inside your camp and legally permits you to just eat your neighbor's crops for free.
Yeah, it is definitely not, your standard inspirational morning reading. We're looking really closely at Deuteronomy chapter 23 today.
Right. And to make sense of all of this, we are pulling from the study notes of two major sources, the Holman Study Bible and the NAA. That's the Nova Almeida Actualizada Study Bible. Because on a first pass, this chapter gives you serious whiplash.
Oh, for sure. It jumps all over the place.
Exactly. You go from these intense biological exclusions straight into military latrine protocols, and then suddenly you are navigating agrarian banking laws. It just reads like a chaotic, completely random assortment of rules.
It really does seem that way at first glance. But the overarching mission of our deep dive today is to demonstrate that this isn't a random assortment at all. When you apply the historical and theological context that our sources provide, you realize these laws construct a highly cohesive blueprint.
A blueprint for the whole society.
Right. They're outlining a society that holds intense religious purity in one hand and radical social generosity in the other.
Okay, let's unpack this. And we should probably start right at the perimeter, because any functioning society first has to define who is actually allowed inside the gates, right?
Yes, the boundaries of the community.
And the boundaries drawn here are incredibly rigid. The chapter opens by banning specific people from the assembly of the Lord, starting with men whose testicles are crushed or cut off, and then people of illegitimate birth down to the 10th generation.
And those ancestral bans are just as severe. Ammonites and Moabites are also barred down to the 10th generation. And the NAA study notes clarify that 10th generation is actually a Hebrew idiom.
Meaning it's not literally just 10 generations.
Right. It effectively means forever. It's a permanent exclusion from the community.
But then it completely flips the script. It states that Edomites and Egyptians are allowed into the assembly by the 3rd generation, which, this strikes me as deeply contradictory.
How so?
Well, you are setting up a system that supposedly values divine justice, yet you are drawing these really rigid, ancestral, biological lines in the sand. It feels less like divine justice and more like, ancient tribal grudge hunting.
I totally understand that reading. It sounds exclusionary to modern ears. But to make sense of the discrepancy, we have to look at the historical context the study notes provide regarding the Moabites and the Ammonites. This wasn't just arbitrary xenophobia. The text gives a very specific reason. When the Israelites were fleeing the exodus from Egypt, which is arguably their most vulnerable historical moment, Moab and Ammon refused them bread and water.
Which, geographically and politically, was basically a death sentence in the desert.
Exactly. And it cuts even deeper because of their shared ancestry. The Moabites and Ammonites were descendants of Lot, Abraham's nephew.
Oh, wow. So these were essentially distant cousins abandoning refugees.
Yeah, and they actually took it a step further than abandonment. They actively hired Balaam to curse Israel. They weaponized spiritual power against a vulnerable people.
Right, though the text notes that God turned this curse into a blessing out of sheer love for Israel. But still, the betrayal was profound.
Profound and lasting. Now contrast that with the Edomites, who are descendants of Esau. They maintained an established brotherhood. And the Egyptians, despite the eventual enslavement of the Hebrews, originally hosted the Israelites as guests during a severe famine.
Ah, I see. So there is a deeply ingrained historical memory dictating these boundaries.
Precisely.
That explains the geopolitical exclusions, sure. But the physical exclusions still sit really uncomfortably. Banning a man because he has been emasculated seems entirely disconnected from his moral character.
It does. But the NAA notes supply the missing cultural puzzle piece here. In the ancient Near East, emasculation wasn't simply a medical reality. It was heavily tied to pagan cultic practices.
Like fertility cults?
Yes. It was frequently a requirement for serving as a priest in specific foreign fertility cults.
Oh, so this is effectively a visual, physical marker of allegiance to a rival deity.
Yes, exactly. The Holman text emphasizes that we should view this discrimination metaphorically. The ban isn't God assigning inherent human value based on physical wholeness.
Right.
It is a visual, definitive rejection of foreign idol worship. The assembly of the Lord had to be physically and visually separated from a corrupt pagan world.
That makes a lot more sense. Yet even within these permanent, rigid boundaries, the biblical narrative provides its own brilliant counter-evidence. Think of Ruth.
Oh, that's a perfect example.
Right. She is a Moabitess. Based on a strict reading of Deuteronomy 23, she is banned forever. Yet she marries an Israelite, becomes the great-grandmother of King David, and secures her place in the lineage of the Messiah.
It's incredible. And the NDA notes point out that God's grace and a person's genuine faith consistently supersede the strict letter of the law.
I love that. The law establishes the protective boundary, but grace provides the pathway through it for those who genuinely seek the God of Israel.
Beautifully put.
So once you have defined this pure community, the immediate challenge becomes maintaining that purity when they leave the safety of their gates to go to war, which is where the text transitions into military protocols and, well, divine hygiene.
Yeah, the physical setup of the military camp is governed by rigorous standards of purity.
Rigorous is kind of an understatement. If a soldier has a nocturnal emission, he is required to physically leave the entire camp. He has to wash himself in the evening, and he can only re-enter after the sun has set.
It's intense.
And it extends to basic human waste. The text mandates a designated latrine area entirely outside the camp. Soldiers must carry a spade or a paddle with their weapons.
Right.
When they need to relieve themselves, they go outside the camp, dig a hole, and bury it.
What's fascinating here is how this transforms our understanding of ancient warfare. If we look at this purely through a modern lens, it is arguably the original leave no trace camping policy.
Yeah.
It's an excellent way to prevent cholera or dysentery in a dense military encampment. But the text doesn't actually cite disease prevention.
No, it doesn't at all. The explicitly stated reason is theological. The text says the Lord walks within the camp to deliver them from their enemies. Therefore, the camp must be holy so that God doesn't see anything indecent and turn away from them.
It's a very specific worldview.
It is. I have to admit, it challenges my conception of the divine, that the creator of the universe is seemingly preoccupied with human bathroom habits.
Well, both the Holman and NAA notes clarify this by diving into the ancient concept of holy war. In this worldview, combat wasn't merely a political or territorial dispute. It was a religious encounter.
God is quite literally mobilizing with the troops.
His presence is tangibly among them. In this ancient theological framework, physical cleanliness and spiritual holiness are inseparable. You cannot claim to be an instrument of divine justice while living in physical defilement.
Right.
The physical space must reflect the purity of the God occupying it.
It is a profound psychological conditioning when you think about it. Every single time a soldier picks up that spade and walks outside the camp, it serves as a physical, mundane reminder that the ground they are sleeping on is shared with the divine.
Yeah, it forces a continuous mindfulness of God's proximity.
It elevates the grittiest, most basic aspects of human biology into an act of reverence.
Exactly. And if the physical space must reflect God's purity, then the treatment of the vulnerable within that space must reflect his moral purity.
Yes, which brings us to a societal shift that I think is genuinely staggering, how this nation handled fugitive slaves. The text dictates that if a slave escapes their master and flees to Israel, they are not to be handed back.
The laws regarding the margins of society, they are so unique.
They really are. These escaped slaves are granted asylum, they are allowed to live anywhere they choose within the towns, and the community is strictly commanded not to oppress them.
The Holman notes provide incredible context here regarding ancient Near Eastern treaties. In the surrounding empires, extradition treaties were the absolute backbone of international diplomacy.
Because slaves were considered supreme economic property, right?
Yes. So harboring a runaway wasn't just a minor offense, it was a major diplomatic violation.
It could almost be construed as an act of war.
It really could. It was an international courtesy between kings to repatriate runaways.
Yeah.
But Israel's law completely ignores that established geopolitical norm. They prioritize the human dignity and safety of an oppressed individual over the property rights and diplomatic favor of a foreign power. And the NAA clarifies this is specifically referring to a foreign slave seeking asylum. It is a stunningly high moral code for the era.
Here is where it gets really interesting, though, because the very next economic law introduces what looks like a massive double standard.
The rules on usury.
Yeah, the text states that Israelites cannot charge interest on loans, whether it's money or food, to their fellow Israelites. but they are legally permitted to charge interest to foreigners.
I know, it sounds harsh.
It does.
Yeah.
You are creating this in-group safety net while seemingly sanctioning the financial exploitation of the outgroup. If this society is so concerned with the vulnerable, why the double standard?
It certainly appears that way until we break down the mechanics of agrarian economics, which the NAA notes detail wonderfully.
Okay, lay it on me.
In an ancient agrarian society, loans were almost never utilized as business capital. And the Israelite wasn't taking out a loan from his neighbor to launch a new trade route or buy a second farm.
They were borrowing because their crop failed and they were going to starve.
Exactly. A loan was a desperate lifeline. When you charge high interest to a starving neighbor, you initiate a cycle of predatory debt that inevitably leads to them losing their family land and selling themselves into debt slavery just to survive.
That makes total sense.
So forbidding interest locally functioned as a mutual aid safety net. A loan was an act of charity to keep a fellow community member alive.
I see. So how does the distinction of the foreigner alter the economic reality of a loan?
Well, in this context, the foreigner wasn't a destitute refugee. Those people were protected by laws like the asylum rule we just discussed.
Right, the runaway slaves.
The foreigner seeking a loan was typically a traveling merchant. They were engaged in international commerce, moving luxury goods across borders.
So a loan to a foreign merchant actually was a business venture. It was commercial capital.
That is the crucial distinction. The law wasn't rooted in xenophobia. It was acknowledging the vast difference between a charitable lifeline to a starving farmer and a commercial investment with a profit-seeking merchant.
Okay, that completely changes the reading.
Yeah. The core economic belief highlighted here is that an economy must be built on generosity, not exploitation. True wealth stems from obedience to God rather than predatory economics.
It is a remarkable system, and this societal ethos of generosity and holiness eventually filters all the way down to the level of personal, everyday integrity.
How an individual handles their promises, their worship, and their neighbor's property.
Exactly. Let's look at the prohibition regarding cult prostitutes. The text mandates that no Israelite can be a temple prostitute, and it explicitly forbids bringing the earnings of a prostitute into the house of the Lord to pay a vow.
Which implies people were attempting to do exactly that.
Yeah, both study Bibles note that this is a direct rejection of Canaanite fertility rites. In those cultures, prostitution was literally a mechanism of worship.
It was sympathetic magic. You perform these acts to appease the fertility gods and guarantee rain and a bountiful harvest.
And the God of Israel utterly rejects this transactional, manipulative form of worship. By refusing the earnings to pay a vow, the text essentially states that God doesn't want dirty money.
Right. Financial kickbacks from illegitimate practices cannot buy divine favor. God desires obedience and moral integrity.
Speaking of vows, the rules regarding personal promises are incredibly straightforward. Making a vow to God is completely voluntary. The text explicitly states that abstaining from making a vow is not a sin.
But once the words leave your lips, you are bound to keep the promise without delay.
Yeah, no backing out.
The NDA notes suggest a profound theological reason for this. God fulfills his own promises. He desires his people to emulate his moral character. If the word of the divine is reliable, the words of his people must carry that same weight of reliability.
That demand for personal integrity perfectly sets up the final and perhaps most famous law in this chapter, the law of gleaning.
Oh, this is a great one.
The text states that if you walk into your neighbor's vineyard or their grain field, you are permitted to eat as many grapes or pluck as much grain as you want by hand to satisfy your hunger.
But there are rules.
Right. You cannot put anything in a basket, and you cannot take a sickle to the standing grain. It's basically an ancient all-you-can-eat, but absolutely no takeout boxes policy.
I love that analogy.
Thanks. But practically speaking, how does an agricultural economy survive if private property is essentially treated as a public buffet?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we see the absolute brilliance of this economic policy. Drawing from the NAA notes, this was intentionally designed to benefit the poor, the hungry, and the traveler.
So it's a built-in safety net.
Yes. But to answer your question about survival, it worked because of the strict physical limitations placed on the generosity. You can only use your hands. No baskets, no sickles.
Okay, so that prevented radical generosity from being exploited into outright theft.
Exactly. It provided a decentralized social safety net. It prevented starvation without requiring a massive, corruptible government bureaucracy to distribute food. The hungry still had to engage in the dignity of going out and harvesting their own meal.
But the landowner was protected from losing their commercial harvest.
You got it. It perfectly balances compassion with respect for labor and property.
It was a highly active law, too. The Holman notes highlight that this is the exact law Jesus and his disciples are utilizing in the New Testament.
Oh, right. In the grain fields.
Yeah, when they walk through the grain fields on the Sabbath and pluck the heads of grain to eat, the Pharisees criticized them for breaking Sabbath work rules, but they never accused them of theft because they were operating entirely within this ancient, legally protected framework of generosity.
The system worked exactly as designed centuries later. That is amazing.
It really is. So what does this all mean when we pull the pieces back together? We started with a text that looked like a disorganized, chaotic list of ancient demands.
But we have uncovered a comprehensive, stunning vision for a society. It establishes distinct boundaries to protect its identity. It demands physical discipline to honor God's tangible presence. It defies international norms to protect the human rights of vulnerable slaves. And it architects an entire agricultural economy around decentralized generosity rather than predatory exploitation.
It is a detailed blueprint for a people attempting to physically manifest the character of the God they worship in every facet of their daily lives.
And it is vital to note, drawing from the Holman text, that for Christian listeners, the strict biological and ancestral disqualifications for entering the assembly that we examined at the start, those no longer exist.
Right. As the Apostle Paul argues in Galatians 3, those physical boundaries are completely transformed and dismantled by grace in Christ.
The physical barriers to entry have been removed, yes. But that underlying call to live a holy, radically generous life remains deeply relevant, which leads to a final profound concept we can take away from all of this.
I am ready for it.
The Israelites structure their entire civilization, from the latrines of their military encampments to the very edges of their commercial farms, around the tangible physical reality that God was walking among them.
Right.
This raises an important question for all of us to ponder today. If you truly believe the divine was walking through your workplace, your home, or your community, what indecent things would you immediately clean up? And who would you suddenly invite to eat from your vineyard?
Wow. That is a phenomenal question to sit with. What changes when we genuinely believe the divine occupies our shared spaces? That is a beautiful place to end today's deep dive. Thank you all for joining us on this exploration of Deuteronomy 23. We appreciate your curiosity and your time. And as we sign off, I want to say this clearly. God blesses all of you listeners. Have a wonderful week, and we will see you next time.